the fourth, the fourth in this series by the She Opened the Door Committee. I'm Lori Magid, a 1985 graduate of the law school and a member of the She Opened the Door Committee. Our committee has had this Ask the Expert series to feature alumni from throughout the university. They're speaking about their experiences, challenges, and achievements in this interactive setting with audiences from literally around the globe. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Linda Uri Greenberg, School of Professional Studies 2022, and a member of our committee. And I am thrilled to introduce my friend, Yen Chu, our speaker today. Yen is a graduate of the law school in 1997, and I had the pleasure of serving with her on the law school's Alumni Association for many years. Yen is currently the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer, and Corporate Secretary of Tailored Brands. Near the end of today's program, we're going to be able to have a Q&A with some of you so that you can ask questions to Yen. So you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We hope to get to as many of your questions as possible. Linda, I'm turning it over to you and Yen for what I know is going to be an engaging and meaningful conversation.
Thank you so much, Lori. And Yen, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here today with our She Opened the Door community. We know it's going to be an exciting chat, and we're going to delve into the intersection of what you do with law and your mission-driven work as well. But first, my first question is really going to be all about your time and experience at Columbia, because we have people online, I'm sure, who are very eager to hear about that. What made you go to law school in the first place? And why did you choose Columbia Law?
So I'm going to start with saying thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here. As Lori said, she and I knew each other from serving on the board of the Columbia Law School Association. And I remember being on the board about 5 years ago when the inaugural She Opened the Door conference was just a glimmer in people's eye, and it came about. And I remember attending that conference. And I love that this series has emanated from that, and that the name continues to carry the title of the program has continued to carry so many fantastic programs. So thank you first and foremost for having me. Thrilled to be here. So why Columbia? And did I always want to go to law school and all that? I was not that person. I wasn't the person that knew from birth that I wanted to be a lawyer. In fact, I think there's a special group of us. People joke all the time. It's the lawyers who went to law school because we don't like blood, so we didn't go to med school. We don't love econ, so we didn't go to business school, etc. But for me, I have always had a very strong interest in understanding governance, and what is just and what is fair. I think for a lot of that, I know a lot of that stems from my childhood and my background. My family and I came to the United States from Vietnam as refugees. I have no doubt that my strong desire to understand governing bodies was informed by that. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. That also, I think, it plays a big part in trying to understand the bigger world, the global impact. I stayed in Minnesota to go to college, but there was a very pivotal moment for me in college when I went to what I considered study abroad, which was to go to New York City, a foreign country. And I did an honors program out in New York, and it was really New York City was your classroom. I studied at the UN. I volunteered at groups like Amnesty International. I did a lot of human rights type of work. And not only did I fall in love with New York City, but my desire to understand governing bodies and intensified and expanded. And so I said, I'm going to marry this love of governing bodies in New York City. And so then I applied to Columbia. It was just the obvious choice. And I think for me also, Columbia is renowned for international human rights law, which is what I really wanted to kind of keep studying and understanding. I read the brochures, which back then was paper, and it was, and there was Professor Lou Hankin, there was Professor Oscar Schachter, there were all these fantastic areas to focus on. And so I said, that's it, I'm going to law school in New York. And also the law school down the street sent me my acceptance as Mr. Yan Chu. So I said, that's it, Columbia's for me. And it's interesting because I'm the first to go to law school. I thought I was the first to go to law school in my family. My parents never really shared with me until after I graduated, actually, that my grandfather, who is a well-known publisher and author, who unfortunately we lost when we left Vietnam on April 30th, 1975, that he had actually graduated from law school in Vietnam and he never practiced. And I think they kept that from me because they didn't really want to influence what I wanted to do. And it really, truly was organic.
I love that. I love that family connection came to light at that point in your life, so that the win-win of you became a lawyer and to know that there was that legacy that you didn't know about. It sounds as if you went into your studies at Columbia knowing that you wanted international and the intersection of the different interests that you had. But would you focus your studies differently today if you could go back to law school? Would you add in other things, or are you pleased with the path that you took from Columbia in terms of law?
I don't think I would change my focus. While I was at Columbia, I stayed true to my passion, whether it was studying the topic or doing extracurriculars around the topic. I was the editor at the Columbia Journal of Transnational Law. I loved it. I got to edit and work on amazing articles focused on international law. And the brochure I read, I was a research assistant for Professor Oscar Schachter on the publication of his paper, The Decline of the Nation State and Its Implication for International Law. And I think about that now, given everything that's going on in the world. And I think about how formative that was for me to really open up my eyes into this area. I participated in the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights Asylum Workshop. I did a lot of things. And while the areas of study scratched my itch to learn about governing bodies in the world, I honestly wasn't sure how that would fit into my career path. I'm a first generation US law student, as I shared. I didn't have anyone in my family who understood how the US legal or even the government system worked, let alone what types of career opportunities there were in those fields. So for me, I navigated a lot of that on my own. And I think today Columbia Law School has so much more of a focus and an emphasis on having its students become global actors and entrepreneurs, which I think is phenomenal. Not to say that it wasn't that way when I was there, but it was a lot less of an emphasis. And I think for back then, it seemed like there were really only three primary paths. You go into nonprofit or government, you go to a law firm or corporate America, or you clerk and you kind of delay making decision A or B. And for me, again, being a first generation, I just didn't know. So I opted for the firm route because I thought the others weren't as clearly defined. And there were far too many variables for someone figuring out, what do lawyers really do? I also think it's not a bad idea to always get training. And I think law firms are really great for that. As we all know, law school doesn't teach you the law, it teaches you how to think like a lawyer, and the years of training at a firm or whatever you choose to do really cements a lot of that. So I wouldn't say I regret any of the things I did. It wasn't exactly translatable for my first job, but I still think it was a really phenomenal experience.
So for those who haven't followed you on LinkedIn yet or checked out your whole past, I'm going to do a very quick rundown. So after Columbia, you started in corporate law with Simpson, Thatcher, and Bartlett. And then you moved to be in-house counsel, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, at Ralph Lauren Corporation. Then you were at Equinox Group, parent company for Equinox Fitness, Equinox Hotel, SoulCycle, and Blink Fitness. And now you're at Tailored Brands, the parent company for brands Men's Wearhouse and Joseph A. Banks. So you've done the private practice and corporations throughout your entire legal career, but you've kept that through thread of being steadfast, passionate about your interests. So you'd focus your work on governance and DEI and community relations. So I would love to first find out, at the first place, how did you get involved in corporate governance work at Simpson, Thacher, and Bartlett? And did you do any pro bono work while you were there too?
And I will tell you, it was not a linear path. And I think most people can tell you that any career after you look back, it's not a linear path. It's not obvious. You can't just sign up to say, I'll do X and that, and use very few people keep it to that. There are always pivots along the way. I decided to do corporate work at Simpson since there were more opportunities in the corporate area for international work than litigation. And during my time there, I did a lot of deals. I wasn't doing governance. Back then, companies weren't paying large law firms to do governance work. It wasn't cost effective. But then as time increased with the implementation of Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, a number of acts and regulations that really focused on corporate governance, that area started to grow. But when I was at Simpson, that was not a carved out area of practice. So there wasn't a department for it. So then how exactly did I get into it, you ask, right? So you're at this firm, you're doing deals, you're an associate, and as an associate, you do what you're told, and you are learning the ropes. How do you have the courage to say, I don't want to do that. I want to do this, or how do I shape that? And I think for me, it was very much that it's being in the right place at the right time. When I was at Simpson, there was the general counsel of a company that I was doing some deal work for, who left the company at that time. And we had learned a lot about the company, the partner and I. And so we kind of became in-house counsel during an interim period. And we started doing a lot of the corporate governance work, the stuff that a company would normally shell out to someone else. We were doing the SEC filings and really kind of managing governance with the board and doing things that typically a smaller firm would do at that time. I would say that, since then, large firms, including Simpson, have built out public company practices, and that's really been a growing area. But at that time, it really wasn't. And again, it's very much, I find this interesting. I'm in the right place at the right time. I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to keep learning it. And I would say that for me, one of the key lessons I have learned throughout my career, and I think it just it applies to everything, but especially in law, is that you really are in control of your future. Nobody tells you that. You kind of start and you think, okay, law is actually one of the most well-defined trajectories. Sometimes you go to a firm, you do this, and then you're in a class even. You go from this class to that class, and you continue. And inertia kicks in, and nobody tells you, actually, you can change that course. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to be able to say, that's not something that I want to do. And to a degree, I mean, it's a service industry. You don't have the luxury of saying, I won't do that at all. You do need to do certain areas, but you can navigate and you can shape and influence. And that is something that you kind of have to keep telling yourself. If you have an interest in an area, raise your hand, let it be known, because people can't read your mind. And you never know when something like that will happen. You never know when there's a general counsel that leaves and you're kind of the de facto interim support for them. You never know when things will happen. I would say that also, if you're in a law firm, it's hard to think outside of the department or the area you're assigned to. But I actually remember one time when I was at Simpson, it was somewhat of a slow period in between deals. And I had gotten to know the partner who ran the tax exempt organization. And she's renowned for in the area. And I remember just talking to her and saying how much I admire that she started this practice. And I said to her, I was like, if I could ever be of any support or learn it. So I did a few things. I learned, I kind of dabbled in it. And in the end, and we'll get to that later, that work, that tax exempt work ended up helping me navigate things later on. So you just never know. It's hard to say when you have a heavy schedule and you kind of want to do these things, but you're like, oh, I got to do the things I have to do. But I think if you make it part of the things you have to do, that is the key.
Yeah. Well, I love the whole idea of reminding people that advocating for yourself and not remembering to raise a hand and to say, can I help? Can I do something? You don't want to take too much if you're overworked already, but you do want to do the things that you find passionate. And I think that's really a helpful thing to remember. So after Simpson, you went to in-house, you went to Ralph Lauren. And then you were advising the board. There you were working on corporate governance, compliance, ethics, corporate social responsibility, and philanthropy, all those things together. So tell us a little bit about how that worked, because now you're in a different kind of place. You're at a company. How did that feel different, and how did you navigate that change?
So the opportunity to go to Ralph Lauren was a dream for me. I've always loved to understanding consumer behavior and consumer demand, especially for strong branded companies. What makes you as a consumer buy this shirt versus that shirt, or allocate your discretionary income towards an experience versus an item, or whatever it is? That has fascinated me. And for me, the psychology behind making a brand and its product aspirational is just fascinating. So when I got the call to go to Ralph, I was like, yes, sign me up. And it was the dream job. I got to work with the board. I got to do corporate governance. So I was initially brought in to oversee corporate governance and SEC filings. In the corporate governance world, as many know, regulation has often come about to address corporate wrongdoing. So you saw it with Sarbanes-Oxley coming in after Enron, Dodd-Frank Act after the financial crisis, all of those things being implemented on the heels of something to fix something. So over my 11-year tenure at Ralph Lauren, I saw a lot, and I saw the governance landscape shift as relevant stakeholders. And that started to even expand in terms of who you define as relevant stakeholders, but as relevant stakeholders focused on corporate social responsibility and human rights. So people started caring. Investors cared, employees cared, consumers cared, NGOs cared. All sorts of organizations started caring about where the product came from, who made the product, what sort of standards were used. And for me, that became a natural parallel with my role expanding. I raised my hand again and I said, let me do this. Let me help build a compliance program, a regulatory compliance program to kind of address a lot of these things. And the way Ralph thought about that was compliance was anything regulatory. So the corporate social responsibility at that time became a big factor. Human rights, labor standards, your ethics. And it was such a fantastic, interesting time. I held the pen at Ralph Lauren, helping to write the very first CSR report. I helped build out their compliance program, but that didn't mean, what does that mean? Put it on a sheet of paper. I went to the factories in Asia. Full circle, I went to a factory in Vietnam, and that was really interesting. So it was just an area that kept growing. And again, I had shown interest in it. I'd raised my hand and said, give me this work. And then the philanthropy and the opportunity to work on the the Polo Ralph Lauren Foundation and projects that the foundation had was just icing on the cake. I mean, working with the Smithsonian Institute, working with the Royal Marsden and the British royal family, and all of those fantastic projects. For me, again, it was the opportunity to continue to merge my own professional and personal interest in community giving and the needs, and marrying that with the needs of the organization at that time. And I would say, again, it goes back to that time I raised my hand and said, can I just learn a little bit about tax exempt stuff? I just am curious. And that gave me the confidence and the foundation, I guess pun intended, to oversee the legal and governance aspects of the Ralph Lauren Foundation. So it's really a nice full circle for me.
And so with the next two jobs, was there anything markedly different, because you're still engaging in those passions, you're growing, you're learning, you're at Equinox, then you're at Tailored Brands, you're feeding those passions again, but what changed, or what did you do that was different, and how did you continue to grow in those two companies?
Well, I was the chief legal officer for Equinox, and I'm the chief legal officer for Tailored Brands. And so I'm responsible for multiple areas of the law, which I'm juggling all the time. And so it's not that I can focus now just on governance or just on some of these pet passions that I've had. But I think that actually also lends itself to opening up more doors. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, when I was, and again, it's about the timing. So when I went to Equinox, I found other areas that complemented my interest, and I continued to stay true to my passion. I started to work more into government affairs and community relations. There was a time, one of the things that I'm very proud of during my time there was the work I did for Woolman Park Partners, which is Central Park's Woolman Rink. At the time, the Equinox chairman tasked me with starting this project. And he said, "Yeah, find out what it takes." And I thought, just me? And so I Googled RFP Woolman Rink, and honestly, and that was like a glimmer in everyone's eye. But working on that project and starting it from RFP to development to building an operational framework for Woolman Rink, I was the Equinox representative. I assembled the team. I worked with related companies and the Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment Group to really win the pitch from the city. And part of that was really to make the Woolman Rink more equitable and more community focused. And so, we worked with partners like Great Performances. We worked with the YMCA, figure skating in Harlem. We worked with a lot of different organizations to say, remember, this is also coming out of COVID. So it's like New York City is back, and you know what? We're back for all sorts of people, not just one select group of people. And it was to make it more equitable, but also more sustainable, and all sorts of factors. And that was a fantastic project for me. And again, it was kind of scratching that itch to do more mission-driven work within a project within my regular job. But I think the thing that I've done both at Equinox and at Tailored Brands is really focus on a lot of the DEI work. I think for me at Equinox, for example, the former chief people officer and I co-founded Equinox's first Equality and Belonging Leadership Council. It will always stand out as one of the proudest moments for me. Not just saying that I helped form the council and worked on the governance, but that the council had an impact, and it did something, and it gave people a sense of belonging. And I've told this story before, so if you'll indulge me, I'll share it again, because it really is something for me that will always stick with me. I think you can all remember in March of 2021 that there was some Asian American women that were brutally murdered in Atlanta. I was in a meeting with an Asian American colleague at the time, and we heard the news. And she just looked distraught. And we were talking, but the words were coming out, and I could just see on her face, they were just words. She was having a hard time. Later on that day, I was in another meeting, and someone else looked a little distraught. And I think the horrific news on the heels of brutal attack after attack at that time was just a lot for everyone. And I saw the exhaustion, I saw the fear, I saw all of it. I went home and I felt helpless. And I think anybody who knows me knows I really hate to feel helpless. And so I sat there and I thought, what can I do? I mean, I'm exhausted. I have fear. I'm one person. It's the same thought we all have all the time. And I said, but I do have a voice and I do have a position where I can make something happen. So I text people at 11 p.m. and I said, here's what I want. I want to pull together our Asian American ERG that we just formed under the council and all this stuff. I have 2 criteria for this call. I want it to be done quickly. I don't want this whole like making it pretty, organizing, and then we're doing it like a week later. I want it to be done the next day or 2. And I don't want it to be recorded. This is not a marketing thing. This is not a whatever. I want this. I want people to feel safe and that they can speak. And so if they know it's not recorded and it doesn't live on, there's going to be more openness. And kudos to the team. They pulled it together in 24 hours. So in 24 hours, we had over 100 Asian American and ally employees on the call. And I will tell you, they all said, Yen, you wanted this meeting. And I said, yeah, I don't have an agenda. I'm not here to speak to you. I only wanted to speak for you. And I am giving you a forum to speak. And people shared stories, people cried, people really opened up, and it was just amazing. It really was just one of the moments for me where I did it not knowing the outcome. I did it not just because I felt like the right thing to do. And it was so powerful. It gave people a voice. You could just see it allowed people to have a sense of control that everybody was desperately needing, and some empowerment. And for me, that's how I've continued to translate some of that work. And I continue to think of other ways to continue to do more mission-driven types of work.
Yeah, that actually, it's very much today's time as well. So yes. I know that kind of sharing is so important for people. And one of your other professional interests, you're a member of the board of directors for Direct Women. And I know that that's another passion and something important to you. But if you could just take a minute to just tell us about that volunteer opportunity and any others, as an Asian American women lawyer, other things that are important to you in terms of volunteerism.
Absolutely. So Direct Women is a national nonprofit. Its mission, and I always laugh because it sounds very meta, its mission is to increase the representation of women lawyers on corporate boards. So everybody's like, so you're on the board of an entity that wants to increase women lawyers on boards. I'm like, you got it. So Direct Women identifies leading women lawyers from Fortune 500 GCs to esteemed law firm partners, academic legal scholars, et cetera, from around the country, who we believe have the experience, the independence, and the business judgment to serve on corporate boards. We then help and position these select women for board service through a number of things, whether it be workshops and webinars, but really through the prestigious Board Institute that we hold annually. The Institute is held with a faculty comprised of CEOs, recruiters from leading search firms, and other corporate governance experts. And it's a boot camp that really sits there and works with women and says, this is what it takes to be on a board, and we'll work with you on your elevator pitch to get there, et cetera. And why women lawyers, you say? Because I think there's often women already have a challenge in getting into the boardroom. And I think women lawyers on top of it have even more of a challenge, because people say, I already have a general counsel. I don't need another person. I already have a lawyer. You also already have a CFO, and a lot of CFOs sit on boards. You also already have a CEO, and a lot of CEOs sit on boards. What is it that women lawyers can bring to the board? And I think, Direct Women has been very successful. Over the years, its alumni have held over 200 corporate board seats already. And its value proposition is pretty clear. Studies have established that board diversity leads to better governance, increased corporate responsibility, better innovation, and just overall greater financial performance. There's research that's been done by Catalyst, McKinsey. You can start naming all the various entities that actually show that companies where there are more than or that have 3 or more women on their boards have on average better financial performance. And yet, despite these studies, it's amazing to me that the number of women on corporate boards is still remarkably low. The number of board seats for women on the Russell 3000, for example, still hovers around 28%. And the hurdle for women lawyers obviously is even higher. So, and as we said, so much about corporate governance comes from wrongdoing. And a lot of governance is also about disclosure versus actually compelling behavior. But having to disclose ultimately, as we all know, sometimes shapes behavior. And board diversity is one of those topics. I think it is one of those areas where disclosure will shape how we perform as companies and what the tone at the top will be. Many may know that NASDAQ implemented a rule that the SEC approved, requiring NASDAQ listed companies to have a director who identifies as female, a member of an underrepresented racial or ethnic minority, or LGBTQ plus by the end of the year. And if you don't have that, you need to explain it. It's not saying you have to have it, you just need to explain it.
Mm-hmm.
A lawsuit was brought to block NASDAQ's rule, and citing that it violated the Constitution's prohibition of discriminatory law. And they further argued that the restrictions on government extend to NASDAQ because of the SEC could penalize the exchange if it didn't enforce the rule. In response, the SEC and NASDAQ argued that the exchange is a private entity and not bound by restrictions on government, et cetera. And I'm proud to say that I actually was a signatory to the amicus brief on behalf of NASDAQ that was filed on behalf of corporate governance practitioners, general counsels, law firm partners, et cetera, and scholars, including a Columbia law professor, that helped lead the Fifth Circuit in recently, I think actually just about a week or two ago, upholding NASDAQ's rule. So for me, it's been really just rewarding work being on the Direct Women board and really advancing that mission.
Yeah. Well done, and congratulations on such a recent win. I have 2 more questions, so I'm just giving everybody who wants to ask a question the heads up to be sure to put your question into the Q&A section. One is that, as an Asian American woman lawyer, do you feel that you faced certain challenges that you could give others advice about? And what were those challenges?
Today, you asked me this today, I have a different answer than if you'd asked me when I first started my career, obviously. And today I'm very cognizant of the implicit bias and stereotype perceptions of Asian American lawyers in general, where we're often perceived as hardworking, but passive and lacking some executive presence, not really speaking up as much, and those types of stereotypes. And among Asian American attorneys in general, women probably experience this even more. Women are far more likely to report that experiencing both overt and implicit racial discrimination stemming from this bias. So I think having the double ceiling of both the glass and the bamboo ceiling is real. I am keenly aware of how that has increased attrition among Asian American women in the legal profession. And the result of that is fewer mentors because there's fewer people at the top. And for me, when I started practicing law, I was far more naive. This was not on my mind. This was not something I thought of. No one spoke about DEI out loud. Therefore, none of us were even thinking about it inside our heads. And understanding unconscious bias, that was not even a thing. That was far from anybody's mind. So when I think back now at all the times I put my head down and I worked quietly and I never complained, and I thought that somebody was just going to notice all the great work I've been doing, I sort of wince. And I think about how I was just feeding into that stereotype and how I really needed to kind of change the narrative. And so for me, volunteering time to support empowering women of color group at Columbia Law School or whatever, what have you, it's really been something for me to help change that narrative. It's forced me to help dismantle the stereotype. It's helping to call out the unconscious bias. It's helping to have someone think about this far earlier than I did in my career.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Women of Color conferences and so many other things. I mean, Lori mentioned in her introduction as well that you're on the board together. You've done so much for Columbia in terms of giving back, and you're here today. So there's another one to add to the list. What makes you keep coming back to Columbia to give back?
You know, other than the great bagels up there, which we started the conversation in the green room about, but
We'll have to get you some.
I'm a grateful person. I wouldn't be where I am with a lot of key people and organizations that have helped me along the way. And Columbia is at the top of that list for me. I am well aware of the extreme privilege that I have, and how I landed where I am, being a war refugee, growing up in a small town in Minnesota, to Columbia Law School and to wherever this is. I mean, well, growth mindset, we're not done yet. Right. So, but Columbia, I mean, I guess, the pun again, Columbia opened the door for me. It really did. And it taught me to be the global thinker that I continue to improve upon. It allowed me to contribute in ways outside of the narrow scope of what I learned in the classroom. And it's important for me to give back. It's important for me to help open that door for others. And so that's actually why I love doing the stuff that I do. I love going to talk to first of all, the first generation professional group didn't exist when I was at Columbia. The Empowering Women of Color group didn't exist when I was at Columbia. Those are amazing things. And so, to help a first generation law student navigate the professional world when their families aren't familiar with having to make decisions in terms of what do lawyers do? What do I wear? All these things that you're too scared to ask. Or the women of color who often get overlooked at a law firm, and or the law firm associates who want to transition to in-house and don't know how. All those things to me are so it's important to just help the next generation. So I've gone back to help the younger version of me Selfishly, I've gone back to make sure that I am going to feel good about where I end up. And I've also done it in other ways. I've hired Columbia alums, and I've gone back to just being like, I started this with saying I'm grateful, and I am, and that's how I'm going to show my gratefulness.
Wonderful. Well, those who are on this webinar, if any of you are looking to have some expertise offered to you, certainly chime in here and ask a question. One thing that you just said that I thought, well, I'll ask a first question and then hope for some others. Is there a story that you might have about a mentor? Because so much of what you're doing is mentoring in terms of bringing people along through the committee work, through your work with Direct Women, all of those things. Is there a story about a mentor who influenced you at some point? And what qualities should women look for when they're looking for a mentor? If they're at a law firm or they're at a company, how do they spot that mentor?
I think there's a lot of talk about mentors versus sponsors versus targeting someone and saying, it's kind of that children's book, Will You Be My Mother? Or Are You My Mother?
Are you
it's
my
like,
mother?
My mentor. And so I think there's a lot of talk about that. For me, it's always just, I think of it as a collective personal board of directors. There isn't a specific mentor that is everything. There isn't a specific sponsor. Each point in my life, there are different individuals who, in hindsight and during those times, I really have looked up to and I have learned from, and I have sought guidance and have provided guidance to me without me seeking it. And I think those are the individuals that stick with me. When I was at the firm, for example, there was a law firm partner who would organize these little lunches with these two women who were in her department and me. And I had rotated out of her group, and I was still, she was in the banking and finance group, and I was in the capital markets group. And the other two associates were in the banking and finance. But she would have these lunches with us. And it was just there was no agenda. It was just these nice little lunches. And it was before the days of the firm having a women's group. It was just a very informal. What it was she was teaching us about belonging. She was mentoring us about feeling supported. I think about outside of legal women who I have really learned from and who have taken me under their wing to teach me things. CFOs that I have worked with, that I still keep in touch with, the women who, to me, I've always just really admired. And I think there was also a C-suite woman who, the first time she actually really crystallized it for me and said, "What's your why, Ann?" And I said to her, I was like, "I'm sorry." And she was like, "Well, I know what you do, but what's your why? Why are you here? Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you do the things you do? Other than obviously you've been programmed to succeed. You've been programmed to do it well, but why? You ever thought about that?" And that to me has been a really amazing mentorship, just forcing me to answer internal questions for myself. And I would say just organizations that I've been associated with, the Direct Women, just an amazing community of mentors.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. This one came in. Would there be any advice in terms of where to go to explore some of these things that you've had on your journey? So, the in-house counsel role or board governance. Are there books? Are there places? Are there websites? Are there things that you would say, take a moment here and start to explore some things, because maybe there's information out there that people don't know about on our webinar?
Well, I would say that it's not a real, I mean, I think the theme today has all been you make of it what you can, right? So you are in control and you can choose. I don't think there is a book that explains this is how you shape a governance slash community development slash DEI slash whatever career while still being in private, like in corporate America. I don't think that there is a specific thing. I think for me, it's been more of raise your hand, figure out what speaks to you and find those opportunities. And I don't think that there is specific resources. There are a lot in each one of those areas, far more today than there used to be. But I think that it really is about just finding the right thing for you, what's your why, what makes you want to continue to do what you do, and weave it together. You get to do it. You get to make it make sense. Have them tell you it doesn't make sense. Have them tell you, no, we don't do that here. Because I bet you if you make it compelling enough, they do it here.
Yeah. Or they could do it there, perhaps.
Right.
And you might be the person who would be the one to start whatever it is that you're passionate about. So bring it to the forefront. The other thing too, though, is it sounds as if so much of this is very much look inward and think through, what do you really want? The why is a really good way for this to progress. One question that came in is, as someone who has a background outside of law, I'm curious to learn from your perspective in terms of additional skill sets or areas of expertise that you believe are increasingly important in the realm of corporate governance for non-legal professionals.
I would say, I think a lot of, and it's not intuitive, but I would say a lot of technology and privacy stuff is having a huge impact on the governance world. I think ESG, as hotly debated as it is today, what you think about on those pillars, environmental, social, governance, like all of those pillars, technology is today kind of weaves all of that together. I think understanding financials is important. Again, didn't go to B school for a reason, but I think just having a big picture as to why things are the way they are, whether you're at a company or whether you're at an organization, to try to understand the big picture of that landscape. But I think these days, everybody, the buzzword is AI, right? But I think that translates far more into like bigger picture technology and bigger picture, some of the areas like what are the concerns people have? Why is privacy such a thing? Why are we worried about that? Why are we worried about the ownership of things when AI is out there? How is that going to shape governance in the long term for corporations before like entity management, and how we deal with one another?
One other question that we have here is, especially as you started off, and for some of our younger listeners, what are some of the challenges that you faced as a woman in the corporate world, and how did you navigate them? Was there any tips and things that you remember from starting out, and then how has that changed as you've continued your career?
I mean, obviously, it's something that many women have faced. It continues to be a challenge in corporate America, but also in the legal profession. The legal profession is based on precedent. It's based on looking at the past. It's based on how has this been done? What can we rely on as we take things forward? One of the things that I faced for a lot of that is, and I remember a story where somebody once said to me, "Oh, you're too young to know that. You wouldn't know. You're too young." And it wasn't a compliment. I saw it as a dismissive, like, you just don't know. And particularly in the legal profession, because again, if you're looking backwards to precedent, I have 10 years of experience doing this type of thing. And so for me, that's always been something that has been, I think I'm not the only one. How you navigate that, there are ways to navigate that. I've always often responded with, I will let my parents, or I'll let my mother know that you appreciate the genes that she passed on to me. I'm not that young. And or I will make comments that can certainly be seen as non-threatening but very firm. And I think that's been something that many women face. I've been mistaken for support staff. I've been I've been told, well, I remember the first time when I started at the law firm, you had to have there were certain banks we worked for, and you had to wear a skirt to those meetings. And the first time I was wearing a pantsuit, and I didn't get to go to the meeting. And I was like, oh no, that's not happening. That's just not happening. So I always had a skirt in my office. I thank God those days are gone. But there were things of that, because I was like, I'm not going to have someone beat me out just because they're wearing pants. I'll show who's wearing pants, right? No, but like, I think, but yeah, no, I think it's been really eye-opening. Lots has changed, probably not at the speed we all need it to change, unfortunately. But I think that it's tough. There have been a lot of challenges in terms of, I think even at the law firm, women in partners with families, and how you navigate that, and the opportunity for, it used to be you go in-house because you didn't have the time to commit to being a partner. It's not the case anymore. It's very demanding to be in-house, and I think it's more about just where you want to allocate your time and be efficient.
Yeah. Well, and also too, I think one thing that I know for sure, not being, part of Direct Women or the other organizations, but I'm sure your stories and your take on how you've led your career is just so helpful, because when we do the She Opened the Door events, we always see that a lot of what resonates the most with people is the personal experiences and how people were able to navigate through their lives. So for that, if anybody has one last thing, as I'm saying my thank yous, put it in the chat. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your experience with us. And also I want to thank the She Opened the Door committee and the CAA for helping to make today's conversation such a success, because there's always the back end as well on getting these things together. For those in the audience, we certainly hope that you'll consider volunteering with the CAA to help get fellow alumni and students involved in meaningful initiatives like this. Our next She Opened the Door Ask the Expert virtual event is Friday, December 8th. So put that on your calendar, please. And you can find more information there should be a link in the chat box where to find us. It's right there. Connect with Yen. You can find her on LinkedIn. And for that, I just want to say to everybody, do have a wonderful day. And we hope that we will see you on December 8th. And one more big thank you to Yen. Thank you for wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you, Linda, for making it easy. And thank you to the She Opened the Door committee and to the CAA for having me. Really, it was great.
Terrific. Thank you all. And thank you all for being here.